What kind of person could commit a crime so horrifying, so brutal, that it leaves behind a trail of questions that no one seems able to answer? In the early hours of January 15, 1947, the city of Los Angeles was shaken to its core when the lifeless body of a young woman was discovered in a vacant lot, hidden away from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress, was found murdered in a manner so cruel, so calculated. It still haunts the city to this day. Her body was severed at the waist, drained of all blood, and posed in a disturbing, almost ritualistic manner. Arms outstretched, legs spread, her body as if carefully arranged for some twisted purpose. No blood was found at the scene, no signs of a struggle. Just a chilling image of a woman whose dreams were abruptly and violently extinguished. Who did this? Why? And, perhaps most chilling of all, how did they get away with it? The Black Dahlia case, as the press would soon call it, became a media frenzy. A story that captivated the public and haunted the minds of law enforcement for decades. The investigation would span years, attracting countless theories, false confessions, and a slew of suspects, each more bizarre than the last. But despite all the attention, one thing remained constant. The killer was never found. Was Elizabeth Short just another victim of the dark underbelly of Hollywood? Or was something far more sinister at play? What drove someone to commit such an unspeakable act? And what truths have been hidden from the public for all these years? Join us as we dig deeper into the chilling story of the Black Dahlia, a murder that remains one of the most gruesome and mysterious cases in American criminal history. Her name was Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old woman who arrived in Los Angeles in 1946 with nothing but a suitcase, a dream, and the belief that one day she would be a star. But for Elizabeth, the Hollywood dream was not meant to be. She was never given the chance to see her aspirations realized. Her life was cut short, and her fate became a nightmare that would never be fully explained. Elizabeth's beauty was undeniable. Described by those who knew her as both enchanting and elusive, she had the kind of appearance that seemed crafted for the silver screen. With dark, silky hair that framed her pale face, a pair of piercing blue eyes that held 1,000 untold stories, and a smile that could light up even the darkest room, she captivated everyone who crossed her path. But behind that captivating image was a woman who lived with shadows of her own. Elizabeth wasn't just another hopeful starlet in the crowded streets of Los Angeles. She carried a story with her, one laced with heartbreak and tragedy that would soon be her undoing. She had been in and out of relationships, living a transient lifestyle that had her bouncing from one apartment to another, barely getting by. Some said she had the heart of a dreamer. Others claimed she had a mysterious air about her that made her an enigma to those around her. But no matter how many people she met, Elizabeth seemed to remain a stranger to herself, a young woman trying to carve a path in a city where the line between fantasy and reality was often blurred. What were the things Elizabeth never shared with anyone? What were the dark corners of her life that remained hidden behind her dazzling smile? In the weeks leading up to her death, Elizabeth's life seemed to be spiraling downward. She had crossed paths with a number of people, men, women, strangers, but nothing would have prepared anyone for the violent end that awaited her. As Elizabeth navigated this world of fleeting friendships and broken dreams, the city of Los Angeles, bathed in the light of the movie studios and the shadows of its unsavory side, had begun to mark her as a figure of intrigue. But who truly knew her? And more chillingly, who was watching her? The morning of January 15, 1947, began like any other for the people of Los Angeles. But for Elizabeth Short's family, it was a day that would change their lives forever. The city was still asleep when, in the early hours, a passerby driving down South Norton Avenue would see something that would freeze their blood. At first, it seemed like just another shadow in the dim light of early morning. But as the car approached, the horrifying truth came into focus. There, in a vacant lot, lay the body of Elizabeth Short. But this was no ordinary discovery. Her body had been brutally severed at the waist, drained of blood, and left in a grotesque display. Her face had been slashed into a twisted smile, an eerie mockery of the life she once had. The passerby immediately called the police, who arrived soon after. What they saw left even the most seasoned officers speechless. There was no sign of struggle, no blood at the scene except for the body itself. It was as if Elizabeth's death had been carefully planned, executed with precision, and left to taunt anyone who might try to piece together the puzzle. For her family, the horror of this discovery must have been unimaginable. Imagine receiving a phone call in the middle of the night, hearing that your loved one has been found dead in the most brutal of ways. No explanation, no clues, just a body, a daughter, a sister, a woman with dreams, reduced to nothing more than a grisly headline. The police quickly realized they were dealing with something far beyond a typical murder. This was a crime that seemed almost impossible to understand. Who could do this? And why would anyone choose to end Elizabeth's life in such a horrifying manner? For her family, the nightmare was only just beginning. As the investigation unfolded, they would be forced to confront not only the brutal reality of Elizabeth's death, but also the terrifying uncertainty of what, or who, was behind it. The Los Angeles Police Department was now thrust into the most high-profile investigation the city had ever seen. Elizabeth Short's brutal murder had quickly become the talk of the town, a mystery that gripped the city, the nation, and eventually the world. Detectives were left with more questions than answers. What could have driven someone to kill Elizabeth in such a savage way? Was this a random act of violence, or was there something much darker at play? The investigators immediately began their search for answers, but what they found only deepened the mystery. Her belongings, a purse, a small bag were found nearby untouched. But curiously, there were no signs of struggle, no fingerprints, no obvious clues, nothing that could point them to a suspect. They combed through the area with the kind of precision you would expect from a major case. The police scoured the vacant lot and its surroundings, hoping to find even the smallest piece of evidence that might lead them to Elizabeth's killer. But the more they searched, the more they were left with the haunting realization that they were dealing with a case unlike any other. There was no obvious motive. Elizabeth's belongings were left undisturbed, which suggested the killer wasn't after money or valuables. Nothing about the scene pointed to a simple robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a random act. It was something planned, executed with chilling intent. And still, the question remained, who could have done this to Elizabeth Short? Who would have been capable of such brutality? And why? With every passing hour, the investigation became even more complicated, and the feeling that they were missing something crucial began to take hold. As the city held its breath, the search for answers grew darker and more desperate. The media frenzy that erupted after Elizabeth Short's death was unlike anything Los Angeles had ever witnessed. It wasn't just a crime. It was a story, one that captured the imagination of the public and consumed the press. The newspapers quickly dubbed her the Black Dahlia, a name that would become synonymous with mystery and horror. The press couldn't get enough of the gruesome details, and every publication seemed to try to outdo the other in sensationalizing the story. Headlines screamed about the unspeakable crime and the Hollywood horror, each new article digging deeper into the salacious details of Elizabeth's life and death. But as the days passed, the case only became more bizarre. The police, overwhelmed by the flood of attention, began receiving hundreds of tips from individuals, each claiming to have information about the killer. But every single tip led nowhere. Some of the confessions seemed absurd, others were filled with false claims. A man swore he had witnessed the murder. A woman claimed to have found a piece of evidence that no one else had seen. But none of these leads turned out to be credible. None brought the authorities any closer to finding the truth. As the press stormed the city and radio broadcasts speculated on every possible angle, the investigation became a spectacle. The public watched, waiting for the next twist in the story. But with each passing day, the answers seemed to slip further away. The Black Dahlia became more than just a crime. It became a legend. And with that legend came confusion, frustration, and a growing sense of helplessness. What had begun as a desperate search for answers was now a media circus, and no one seemed any closer to uncovering the killer's identity. The nature of Elizabeth Short's murder was chilling in every sense. It wasn't just the brutality of the act, but the meticulous care with which the killer staged the scene. Elizabeth's body had been drained of blood, and positioned in a way that suggested something far more deliberate than a random act of violence. Her body had been severed in half and placed in a manner that felt almost ritualistic. But why? Why had someone gone to such lengths to make her death seem like a twisted symbol? The killer's choices were no accident. Each detail seemed intentional, designed to shock and unsettle anyone who stumbled upon the scene. The absence of blood at the crime scene hinted at careful planning, perhaps even an understanding of anatomy. It was as if the killer knew exactly what they were doing. The weapon used to carry out such a brutal act was not a typical choice. An axe, a simple yet terrifyingly effective tool, was the weapon of choice. The damage it inflicted was severe and precise, suggesting a deep familiarity with violence, perhaps even an intimate knowledge of how to inflict pain and death. But despite the brutality of the crime and the clear signs that this wasn't a random killing, the police were still at a loss. There were no fingerprints, no clear evidence that could point to the killer's identity. It was as though the killer had taken care to cover their tracks, making sure that no trace of them remained behind. Who was capable of committing such an atrocity? Was this a crime of passion, or was there a deeper, more twisted reason behind it? The police were left with more questions than answers, and as the investigation continued, the killer seemed to slip further away, leaving only a trail of chilling clues and unanswered mysteries. Over the years, the Black Dahlia case has become more than just a story. It's a puzzle that many have tried to solve. Numerous suspects have come and gone, each with their own theories and evidence that seem to point in different directions. But after decades of investigation, no answers have come forward. So who was behind this brutal act? Some believed that Elizabeth's killer was someone from her past, a man who had been close to her, perhaps a lover, a friend, or someone she had trusted. It was even suggested that a man she had been dating before her death may have had something to do with it. Could it have been someone she knew well enough for the crime to be personal? Others thought that Elizabeth's killer might have been someone she had met only shortly before her death, an opportunistic stranger who crossed her path at the wrong moment. Some pointed to a traveling doctor, perhaps someone with medical knowledge who could have carried out such a precise and violent act. There were even theories suggesting that a failed Hollywood actor, desperate for fame, had resorted to such a heinous act to get attention. Or maybe even a police officer, someone who had inside knowledge of the investigation and the city's inner workings. Each of these theories seemed plausible at the time, but after hundreds of tips, confessions, and dead ends, the killer remained elusive. The case seemed to slip further and further into mystery, with each new suspect only adding confusion rather than clarity. Was Elizabeth's killer someone she knew? Someone who had a personal connection to her? Or was it a random act of violence, carried out by a stranger who had no real connection to her at all? Theories continue to abound, but the truth remains as distant as ever. And now we ask you, what do you think? Who was the Black Dahlia's killer? Could it have been someone she knew? Or does the truth lie somewhere deeper, somewhere we've yet to uncover? Let us know your thoughts, because, even after all these years, the mystery still haunts us all. Her death is more than just a gruesome murder. It has become a symbol of the mystery that lingers in the heart of Los Angeles. Experts, criminologists, and the public have pored over every detail, but the truth remains elusive. Why was she chosen? Was there a reason for the brutality? Elizabeth Short's murder is not just a crime. It's a haunting reminder of how one unsolved mystery can echo through history. The questions continue to stir, as do the whispers of answers that we may never find. Could the killer still be alive today? Or has the truth been hidden in plain sight for decades? Some believe the key to unlocking the Black Dahlia murder is closer than we think. Perhaps a detail missed, a name long forgotten, or a clue that was overlooked. Maybe someone out there knows the truth, and just maybe, the case will finally be solved. Or will the Black Dahlia remain an enigma forever? The truth may be closer than we think. But is it hidden in plain sight, or buried so deep that it may never be found? If you have any clues, theories, or even questions about the Black Dahlia mystery, don't stay silent. Join the conversation. The story isn't over, and you might just hold the key. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more chilling stories like this one. And remember, some mysteries were never meant to be solved, or were they?